Hey, it's me again, Cecilia. And for today, I'll be drawing my main characters from my comic, Lemon Soda and Coffee, on a date at a cafe. And with that, I'll also be walking you through my general thought process when drawing more complex backgrounds. So, let's jump right into it. To get a good idea of where I was headed with this illustration, I decided to draw up a few thumbnail sketches. Thumbnails are very rough, not full-size sketches. It is always recommended, at least by me, to make them whenever you draw more complex illustrations. This really helps to just barf up a lot of positioning ideas that you can choose from that will ultimately make the drawing much better. For this particular illustration, I made 3 different thumbnails. The first one was the original idea I had, where it was only Axel and May in a quite close-up shot, but that gave little opportunity for me to draw a background, so I drew up a second one. A second one in which I added Milo in the mix and changed up the position of the characters a bit, but I found that it took away from the intimacy of the picture with him added, so I drew up the third thumbnail. I zoomed in too much on the characters in the 2 previous sketches, so for this third one I purposely zoomed it out so I get to draw their environment better. And that last thumbnail was the one I decided to run with for this illustration. Although I liked all 3 thumbnails I drew up, the third one seemed to be more fitting with the base intent of drawing a cafe with details. The way the thumbnail was drawn was in a 1-point perspective. I initially tried to complexify the detailed sketch by making it into a 2-point perspective piece, but I quickly abandoned the idea because I thought the more complex perspective could be distracting from the emotion of the scene. And also because I just started off real bad on drawing it. I can never say enough times how important references are. If you do not know how to draw something, or if you do know how to draw something, but you want to keep it consistent all across the board, use references, bro. I don't know why I just talk like that, sorry. I always gather my references before I start drawing, if I already have a pretty good idea of the direction I want to go in. Of course, even during the time I draw, if there is a particular element I forgot to find references for, I'll just stop what I'm doing and go search for that. I mean, it's pretty difficult to draw something when you don't know how you're gonna draw it, right? So it's just a normal thing to just stop and look for references. Or at least, that's what I do. But anyways, for this particular drawing, I found a bunch of different cafe references like these. And I mashed them all up. Oh, that cherry's cool. Oh, that I could use that color palette later on. And it always just sort of builds up from there. Even when it came down to the characters or how I wanted to dress them, I looked up references. I am very far from a fashion expert. Like, I pretty much rotate between the same 5 shirts that I get washed and land on top of the clean clothes pile. I know, scandalous. But that doesn't mean my characters need to be on my level of laziness if I want them to be interesting looking to look at. Wow, that was an amazing sentence. So for Axel, I found some real cool tweed jacket references that came in pretty handy later on when I started coloring the piece. And for May, I found some real cool dress ideas too. And woohoo! I was set. After I was done sketching everything out, I moved on to the line art part. This is usually the part I like the least whenever I draw something because it's quite tedious to do. By the time I usually get to the line art part, all elements are pretty much set in stone and just need to be cleaned up. So to me it feels more like I am redrawing the same things while having to be much more precise and careful, and well, that can be quite tiring to concentrate on for long periods of time. I recommend listening to some cool music or videos you don't need to look at while doing this part of a drawing, or any part of the drawing process that you don't like as much. It can make time pass faster, and for me it gives me a lot more motivation. I also like to make my life easier during the line arting by doing things like copy-pasting repeating elements. Like in this drawing, I copy-pasted the chairs, something I permitted myself doing, because this is in a one-point perspective, where the chairs are pretty much symmetrical to one another. In any other piece, doing something like this would look weird, but here I thought it would not be too disruptive. So for the flat colors here, I went with the same method as the forest video, where I tried to do all the flat colors in grayscale at first. Since I wasn't entirely sure about the colors I intended to use, this was a pretty neat way of just filling in all the general areas so that I can change and put colors on top of them later on. I knew I wanted a lot of warm brown colors, but I wasn't exactly sure of the tones I wanted to use in all, so instead of going on a trial and error rampage until my eyes pop out, this grayscale method helped me keep my sanity. Which can sometimes still be very debatable. Putting in the colors over the grayscale was surprisingly easy and didn't take as much time as I anticipated. I could start shading fairly quickly. The colors of the clothes were directly referenced from the pictures I found. I just needed to find a fitting shade of the colors that didn't stand out from the background. Since the base colors in the rest of the piece weren't super saturated, choosing much more quote-unquote cleaner/brighter shades of colors for the clothes would have given off the impression that their clothes were glowing, or that the colors were simply badly chosen and out of place. You can't really just use any random color if you want it all to come together well, unless the intent is to highlight a certain aspect of the drawing, or all the other colors are already super bright. For this piece, if I were to leave it in like, I don't know, black and white or grayscale, putting one single element in color would make sense and might end up looking super cool. But since I chose to go in a much more traditional and realistic color palette, if I had like a bright neon green somewhere, it would just look weird. I wanted to make all the wooden elements, the floor, the chairs, the walls, quite shiny and reflective, so I detailed them quite a lot. I put a lot of emphasis on the strength of the sunlight, and I made like 4 different light effect layers of different intensity and color, with some layers set to lighten and others to glow. To get a nice and warm light, I used a lot of yellows and oranges. By contrast, I used a lot of gray purples for the shadowy elements. The purples I used were pretty warm too, but put beside all the much warmer colors like the browns, the reds, and the yellows, it contrasted well. This balancing act between the cold and the warm was very important. The characters were indoors, and the only source of light came from the outside, where I'd imagine it would be a warm, sunny summer afternoon. So naturally, the inside would need to contrast with the warm outside. With the lack of lighting, it would be darker and a bit colder indoors. Even so, I didn't want to exaggerate too much that coldness, because there was a specific kind of atmosphere I wanted to create, a specific kind of mood I wanted to project. I mean, look at his face. He looks so content, and her so happy. Making their environment cold would have set an entirely different mood between the two. Hence, the abundance of purples, yellows, and reds. All quite warm, but very fitting with the attitudes and expressions of the characters. To put an even better emphasis on the strength of the light, I made the curtains slightly translucent, like the sun shines through them. I've never drawn this kind of effect, but I am pretty proud of how it turned out. It softens the piece a great deal and takes in consideration how the light behaves when passing through a pale curtain. After I was pretty much done with the shading of the background, I moved on to the characters. I needed to take in consideration the same kind of lighting effects and shading effects as before, so that part went quite well. As I was working away at shading May's dress, I realized I could make it much more interesting looking by adding a pattern on it. So I filled in the area with a screen tone and made it white with a transparency to blend in with the base green. I was getting close to finishing the illustration by this point. Besides Axel's clothes, only small details were left to be finished to give that extra pizzazz to the drawing. I added in things like small dust particles in the air where the light shone in the window, as well as small clouds in the air in the background. I also tried doing some picture effects or zoom-in effects, without much success, and opted to just do a Gaussian blur to the contours of the picture to guide the attention towards the subjects of the drawing. So, after 6 hours, 51 minutes, and 36 seconds of almost consecutive time of work, here is the final illustration. The high-resolution version of this illustration, as well as the step-by-step breakdowns of it, are all up on my Patreon. Thank you very much to all of my patrons, without whom I couldn't be making these videos. Thank you again, and have a lovely day. I'll see you next time!